Hi, welcome everyone. Good morning. My name is Stephen DeFalco. I'm on the Sloan Research Papers team. Today it's my pleasure to introduce Elyse Guilfoyle, who will be presenting Selling Out, Understanding the Path to Purchase for Sports Tickets. The presentation is going to be 20 minutes long, and we're going to allow 5 minutes for Q&A at the end, for which I'll be walking around the room with the microphone. We ask that you please hold all of your questions until the end. Thank you very much, and please join me in welcoming Elyse.
Hi, everybody. As Stephen mentioned, my name is Elyse Guilfoyle, and I'm a senior industry analyst at Google. And my role at Google specifically involves conducting market research and consumer research for live events and ticketing clients. And a subset of that sector of clients deals with sports tickets, which is what I'll be talking about today. So the last time that I actually bought sports tickets, and some of you may argue that it's sports entertainment, was to a WWE event in December. My friends and I decided, we've never been to a WWE match before. We really want to go. Let's see what it's all about. So I actually had to look online and figure out, how are events organized? So I went to Wikipedia and found out that you have your SmackDown events and you've got your Raw events. So that took me to WWE's website to actually see what their schedule of events was for Detroit, which is where I live. So my friends and I took about a week to kind of coordinate schedules. And once we had a date in mind, I went back to Google and I searched on WWE tickets. And I saw that Ticketmaster was the official seller of tickets for the WWE, and that's where I bought my tickets. And I realize that's not everyone's path to purchase for sports tickets. Hopefully, most people know a little bit more about the events they're going to than I did. But I think it really exemplifies the many different types of paths that people can take when they're on that journey to eventually buy sports tickets. And in 2014, Google commissioned research with Ipsos MediaCT, and it was a survey of about 3,000 people who had purchased live events tickets in the past year. And based on that, we asked them questions about all of those offline and online touch points that contributed to their ticket purchase, as well as their behavior before, during, and after that purchase. And we looked at all different types of live events categories. We looked at arts and theater events, we looked at concerts, and we looked at sports. And this year, we worked with Compete to do something kind of similar to examine that behavior, but instead of asking people about their behavior, we actually examined their online web behavior by conducting a clickstream study in the weeks leading up to someone's purchase for a live event for those same categories of live events to look at how are people searching, what types of websites are they going to, are they consuming video content. So today, I'm going to talk about both that Ipsos study and the Compete research that we've done in relation to sports tickets. Through the Compete study, we analyzed monthly unique visitors to a number of top sports websites and estimated that there are about 80 million people online in a given month who are interested in sports. But the actual number of people who are turning that interest into an action is much lower, at about 6 million people going to a game every single month. So clearly, there's an opportunity here to turn viewers of sports content into doers, people who are actually going to games. And maybe you've seen this statistic before, but we know that 30% of people would have gone to a live event had they actually known it was happening. For something like football, where there's 2 events each month, maybe awareness isn't as big of an issue. But for sports like baseball or basketball, where there's maybe a couple of games happening in a week, and the scheduling might be a little bit more erratic, this might be a bigger issue. And most people find out about live events that are happening online. So clearly examining kind of this relationship between your consumer and their web behavior is really, really important for your marketing strategy. And the Compete study showed us that 57% of people who are buying sports tickets online are taking 5 or more conversion steps leading up to that purchase. And a conversion step can be anything from a visit to a relevant sports website, a ticketing website. It can be a relevant search, and it can also be visits to competing sites. So based on this, I think it's just really incredible about how highly considered this type of purchase actually is. And it makes us realize that it's a lot more than just a simple transaction. So with most people telling us that the way that they're finding out about live events online, I think the statistic can play a really strong role in your overall digital strategy to help reach people at these 5 or more conversion points that they're taking across online to help drive awareness for your game, consideration to go to your event, more conversions for tickets, and then ultimately loyalty for your team or your brand. And that leads us to the See, Think, Do, Care framework, which is a framework that we just generally use at Google to describe people's path to purchase for any type of product or service. So for sports specifically, or sports tickets, we can think of C as anyone and everyone who just likes sports. And that probably feels pretty broad, and it's definitely not the closest that you can get to that final ticket purchase, but it's really where a lot of awareness happens. And from what we saw in the previous slides, we know that awareness is an issue in this space. The Think section is anyone who's actively considering going to a sports game. And then the Do is what someone is doing, the how and the when of how they actually buy sports tickets. And finally, we have Care, which is the behavior of that person who's either at the event or who just went to it. So first, we'll cover the C section, which is all about awareness. Our research through Ipsos showed that more people are finding out about a game to go to simply by browsing the web than they do from word of mouth or advertisements. So it's really important to examine your consumers' web behavior. And last year, we know that professional sports teams' marketing budgets, only 15% of that was dedicated to digital marketing online. So it's really important to make sure that you're allocating the time and the resources and the content to that channel, because that's where people are discovering your events. The Ipsos survey also identified social as being that main awareness factor for people discovering events. 18% of game ticket buyers reported that social networks were the most influential touch point in introducing them to a game that they didn't know was happening. And that might not be so surprising because games are just an inherently social event and very rarely do people go alone. But what might be surprising is how much online video actually drives consideration for these types of events. Games, people love game highlights, they love the visual experience of the game. And of people who were exposed to an online video in advance of that sports ticket purchase, 25% of them reported that online video was the most influential in impacting their likelihood to go to a game that they weren't otherwise considering. And that consideration behavior really leads us to Think, which is all about people who are actively thinking about going to a game. And when we think of sports fans, we hear the word fan, and we just automatically assume, yeah, the person knows what team they want to go see, what matchup they want to attend. But I think what we found particularly surprising at Google is that 1 in 3 people who are thinking about going to a game aren't entirely sure which one they want to go to. So as a team marketer, you can take this in 2 ways. A, you can try and lock down that person that's already thinking about going to your game, or B, you can try and change someone else's mind, someone who's maybe looking for something to do but isn't entirely sure what that's going to look like just yet. And the Compete study also helped us identify how are people interacting with sports content online in advance of that purchase across all the different types of sports ticketing categories. And we found that people who bought basketball tickets ended up viewing the least amount of sports content in those 2 weeks leading up to that ticket purchase, at about 2.9 sports content sites visited on average during that time frame. And for the sports that visited the most, people who bought football tickets and hockey tickets ended up viewing the most sports-related content in advance of that purchase. And I mean, this could be because football is very big in the US, or hockey fans are some of the most rabid fans out there, so they're consuming a lot of content. And earlier I mentioned that online video plays a really strong role in consideration for these types of events. And this is especially true for sports ticket buyers, and mainly when it comes to YouTube. Sports ticket buyers watch 5 million YouTube videos every single month. And To put that into maybe a bigger perspective, if you estimate that every YouTube video might be about 3 minutes in length on average, that's 28 million years, I'm sorry, that's 28, not million, that's 28 years of online video being watched by sports ticket buyers every single month on YouTube, and that's huge. And online video definitely affects consideration, but it affects the likelihood of someone who will potentially purchase tickets to a game. Through Compete, we found that if someone only visited one sports ticketing website, their likelihood to make a purchase and to buy tickets to a game was 3.8%. But when someone actually visited a sports ticketing website and watched 5 or more YouTube videos during that same consideration window, their likelihood to purchase a sports ticket quadrupled. And now we're at Do, which is all about the when and the how if people are buying tickets to these games. 76% of event-goers will purchase their ticket within the month of the game. But what we learned through our Ipsos research and our clickstream research is that this process can sometimes take a lot longer than that, even months. So it really helps us to realize and redefine our concept of traditional on-sale date marketing. People are looking for events to go to year-round, and they're raising their hands and searching online. And if you're not there speaking to that consumer who's actively looking for events to go to, there are a lot of ticketers that sell year-round that will do this for you. And search is a primary spot for conversions that occur. 81% of people who used a search engine in their research ended up buying tickets to a game. That's more than people who just use social media and people who just use online video. Compete also took a look at the different types of searches that are happening, just to dive deeper into search, to figure out the different types of terminology that people search on in advance of that ticket purchase, so in the 2 weeks leading up to that. So we looked at generic searches, which are some version of a team name. And we also looked at ticketing searches, so some combination of a team name and a ticketing term. And you can see that the volume on generic search terms in those 2 weeks leading up to a purchase is a lot higher than ticketing terms. And the spikes that you see on the right-hand side for football and for baseball, that makes sense in a way because football has higher average ticket prices, so people are probably searching more to look for a better deal. And with baseball, there's just a higher volume of games that are happening over all the other sports. So as marketers who are using keyword advertising or thinking about keyword advertising, clearly there's value in advertising against both of these types of terminology to make sure that you reach that broadest possible audience who's thinking about going to a game or is just interested in the team. And earlier I mentioned that 57% figure of people make 5 or more conversion steps, and a lot of those conversion steps are involving comparison shopping. Almost half of game ticket buyers will comparison shop before they make that final ticket purchase. And our research also showed us that 25% of game ticket buyers are visiting 3 or more sports ticketing sites in advance of that final purchase, and that's a lot. And so when we looked, just thinking about our broader research studies, when we looked at all the different types of live event categories and we were analyzing it for concerts and arts and theater and sports, it turns out that sports ticket buyers comparison shop more than any other category of live events. And even though 50% of all queries right now on Google.com are coming from mobile, we know that mobile isn't necessarily a place where that same level of conversions are happening right now. From what we've seen, about 7 to 20% of all online conversions are coming from mobile devices right now. But even though it's a place where maybe not 100% of your conversions are happening, it doesn't mean that we should ignore that as a really valuable space, because it's where a lot of research and attribution are happening. And from the Ipsos survey, we found that of people who had used their mobile device to research a game ticket purchase, ended up making that final purchase. And that's across any device, not just on mobile. And now we're at the care portion, which is all about someone's behavior either during a game or right after they went to that game. Of people who are at the game, right then and there, 65% of them are engaging in some kind of online activity. And 25% of those people, they're posting about it on social media, and they're shopping for merchandise. So as a marketer, it's clear that the value of this consumer who's at the game, who's engaging online, they're posting about it, the value of this person is enormous, especially when it comes to merchandise, because today's game goer might be a lot less inclined to wait in a really long line at the venue itself when they know how easy it is to shop online. So if you can speak to that consumer right then, your ability to convert that consumer goes up exponentially. And I think this statistic in particular is really the core of the care phase. Half of people who are either at the game or just went to the game, they're going to end up researching future events to go to based on just their experience that they just had. And I think that this really speaks to the value that there is in this type of consumer. And from our perspective and what we've seen team marketers do, no team marketer is really taking advantage of this right now, because this audience, they're not just posting about it on social media and they're not just putting up pictures of the event they went to, they're looking for more events to go to. And that wraps up our research and our See, Think, Do, Care framework for sports tickets. I think for me, the main takeaway of all of this research is just how highly considered this type of purchase really is, and how engaged consumers are across all channels on search and online video and social, and even all devices. So I think the question to ask yourselves as marketers is, are you just as engaged as this audience is across those same channels and those same devices? Thank you.
Hi, at this point we're going to open it up to Q&A. So Elyse, you can call on whoever has a question.
Okay. Any questions? Oh, right there.
Oh, sure.
Hi, my name is Paul Schreiber. One of the things Google is concerned with generally is search quality, and I'm wondering how that affects ticket buying behavior.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So our team works with both major primary ticketers as well as all of the sports leagues, and search quality is a huge factor in that. And what search quality is, so if you think about search engine marketing, it's however much you're willing to bid for a particular keyword multiplied by this factor that we have, which is called a quality score. So that's how relevant the keyword is to the ad that you've posted, to that landing page that you're directing to. So when we work with teams, we really try and educate them on making sure that it's the best user experience, because that's really what quality score is all about. It's making sure that you're taking people from a keyword that they just searched to the most relevant page that they probably wanted to go see. So a ticketing term should direct to a ticketing page. So that's certainly a factor in all of this, and I think teams are more and more aware of it. And of their marketing budgets, when it does go to online, from what we've seen, most of it does go to SEM. So I think teams are getting better and better at this as time goes on, and especially as they're trying themselves to advertise in a really competitive market, because there are a lot of ticketers out there who are advertising online, some of them sometimes in partnerships with teams, but it's certainly a really competitive space. So we do try and emphasize and educate teams on how to improve that search quality. Yes?
Hi, I was wondering, what do you think is one of the barriers to the mobile market in terms of purchasing if the numbers are so much lower there?
Yeah,
Is it a user interface, or is it actual ease of search?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I think it depends. So consumers are definitely searching there, especially for sports. The volume that we've seen on sports queries, specifically on mobile devices, is huge. And I think all ticketers realize there's value in mobile. Every single team that we've worked with has a mobile app. They've got a great mobile site presence, and they understand the value of the mobile consumer. For ticketing specifically, I think sometimes there's fall off because maybe teams are underinvesting in that because maybe they don't have the technology for someone to either buy a ticket right there on their phone and then eventually use that phone to present their ticket at an arena or a stadium. So that kind of technology is maybe not where it should be. But I think for the most part, ticketers are ramping up. Sometimes from a consumer perspective, when we've asked them about why aren't you necessarily inclined to make a purchase on a mobile device, a lot of it comes down to being hesitant. They maybe have had a bad experience in the past, but maybe that was like a year ago. And then ultimately, you just have to make that conversion process and the conversion form the most easy for people as it can get. So a lot of times entering all that information, it just takes too long on those devices. Yes?
We'd love to learn more about the Ipsos study. How did you source participants? What were the criteria that you used to pick?
Yeah, that's a good question. So he wanted to know about the Ipsos study and how we sourced the participants and what criteria we used. So across Google, for many different industries that Google works with for advertisers, we work with third-party research companies, and I would say probably the main two, at least, that we work with are Compete and Ipsos. And so Ipsos has a pre-existing panel of all types of people that are willing to take a survey, and it's an online survey. And so based on that, they were able to make sure that we had 3,000 participants evenly spread across a number of categories. So it was 1,000 people for arts and theater tickets, 1,000 people for concert tickets, 1,000 people for sports tickets. And then within that, we asked questions to those audiences, similarly asking them about their conversion behavior and their behavior after the game. And so that's pretty much how we sourced it. Does that answer your question? Great. Yes?
For people who were purchasing online
Yes.
on their mobile devices, do you find any inclination on using a team's app or a third-party app versus purchasing on the web?
Yeah, we didn't ask any survey questions around that specifically, and our Compete Clickstream study didn't analyze in-app behavior just because it doesn't have that capability. But I think anecdotally, I think teams are more likely to see conversions through their apps if they offer that, because you're reaching an audience that's already interested, they've already downloaded your app. And at Google, we actually have forms of advertisements on mobile devices where we can identify that someone already has your app on their phone. So when you send them an advertising message, you should be able to deep link into that app and make sure that they get to your ticketing page if they're looking for tickets. So no, we didn't ask questions in the survey, and we weren't able to track that in Clickstream, but we do know that in-app conversions are very strong. Yes?
I work in the NASCAR industry. I know you have some background in that. Do you see a lot of differences in maybe NASCAR similar to the WWE experience, and maybe the sports franchises that have 8 home games or 4 home games or even only 2?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So I actually haven't worked with the NASCAR at my role at Google, so I can't speak to that in particular, but I imagine the same issue applies where like there's not that one core place where people are going to, and maybe it's not as locally tied, so maybe it doesn't have that same, at least type of fan base. So yeah, I think the marketing strategies have to be a lot different, and it's really about communicating like when are those events happening and being able to reach that audience who's already attended a game, which from what we found always makes them a lot more likely to want to go to games in the future.
And we have time for one more question.
Yes?
In your click study, can you draw any conclusion from number of clicks or number of sites visited in terms of the quality of the data or the information on the first or second site? So maybe it's negative to have more clicks for a league or for a property.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think maybe what that might translate into is like average conversion value. Like, so if someone took 2 steps, were they more likely, is that what you mean? Like, what was the value of that conversion that happened?
Is it better to have a fan that needs to go to 5 sites versus 2? So is it better to have 2 versus 5? The 2 being that they had better information, so they didn't need to go to the 3rd site.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we can say that like blanket-wise that someone that takes 2 conversions, that's better than someone that takes 5 conversions. I think it depends like who's marketing, what type of consumer they are, because I think that people that take less conversions are definitely sure about what they want to go to. So maybe that's a consumer that's already in the bag potentially. Maybe they would have ended up on your site anyways. But for someone that takes maybe 5 or more conversions, they're shopping around. Maybe they're looking for a website that they trust. So I think that if you're not part of that consideration process as a brand, I think being there in that moment for someone that is taking the more conversion steps could be really valuable. That could be like a really good opportunity for a brand marketer.
All right. Thank you all very much for attending, and thank you very much, Elyse.